Welcome back, everyone. My name is Austin Revel. I run 2F Tactical. I gun shop here in New Prague, Minnesota. You can always check us out at 2FTactical.com. I also forgot to mention in the last video. Please like, comment, subscribe, help this channel grow as we bring to you a historical look at gun control in the United States. And as we get to the end of that, we will go through some of the historical pieces that I have in my personal collection, which I'd love to share with you. So today we are talking about the Gun Control Act of 1968. So previously, and we had discussed the National Firearms Act of 1934. So then the Gun Control Act of 1968 purports to do a couple of things, and it really updates the National Firearms Act in a lot of ways and is fairly relevant into what we see today. One of the things that we have noticed, obviously, with the ATF's new pistol brace rule and with their frames and receiver rule, they are citing the Gun Control Act in several instances. And the reason for this is twofold. First off, they do cite the National Firearms Act, of course, because that is the first gun control act that passed in the United States. Secondly, they are looking at the National Firearms Act did leave out some things. So they're looking at the expanded definitions in the Gun Control Act 68. So going back to 1968, we hop in the DeLorean, we're going with Doc Brown back in time, right? So what has happened? Well, 1968, Lyndon Baines Johnson is President of the United States. He ascended to this role as Vice President underneath John F. Kennedy, who unfortunately was assassinated just 5 years prior, 1963, by we won't get into. For the YouTube verse, there's plenty of videos out there, and if you would like to do some deep dives into possibly JFK's assassination, we could, but we're not going to. That's not the purpose of this video. So just 5 years later, Lyndon Baines Johnson elected now. He had finished out Kennedy's term and is now the official president of the United States. This had been a act that they wanted to pass since the Kennedy assassination. So the first thing this act does is establish what we know as the FFL system today. It made a licensed registration process for dealers of firearms. It also did the early iterations of the 4473 and what we see today. That was updated further in the Brady Bill and then the Sullivan's ban, all that came a little later in the 90s, which we'll get into, but they was the early iterations of this. It also set some hard parameters for importation of firearms, and that's kind of something we're going to see a lot of come later, which is, this is the first time that there was like a set parameter of what was prohibited and what was allowed into imports in the United States. It established what we hear now as the sporting purpose clause. That is all it says. And the direct quote is, in order for importation of firearms to be approved in the United States, they must be proven to be for sporting purpose. There's no definition of sporting purpose and what that means. That has been twisted and used to ban firearms from importation. H.W. Bush, for instance, banned Chinese imports, saying that there was no sporting purpose for those guns. Say the SPAS 12, the Franke SPAS 12, famous from Jurassic Park and the Terminator. That was banned for importation in the United States because they're saying that there's no sporting purpose for that. So it's kind of a undefined catch-all term. And it is used by the executive branch willy-nilly about when they will let things be imported. The other thing it did was update the National Firearms Act to add suppressors to it. Suppressors that were not on it originally, now it was added. And the big thing it did was actually get the federal government out of some hot water. We did talk about this briefly in the National Firearms Act video, but John F. Kennedy had decided to sell M1 carbines to the NRA members in order to raise money for his defense budget. The problem with this is the M1 carbine barrel length is 17.25 inches. Well, under the National Firearms Act, 18 inches was the set barrel length for both rifles and shotguns, with the exception of 22 caliber or smaller, which was lowered to 16 inches. So it updated it to say the rifles were now 16-inch barrel lengths, which, again, just getting into the weeds here, just shows you how arbitrary that 16, 18-inch number is. So they had legally sold these things in 1962 to the U.S. citizenry, and then now they're like, well, we got to fix this because these were NFA violations. We just let them out there into the public, don't know where they are, so we're going to retcon this to fix now. So it did do that. It also allowed amnesty for machine guns. Now, this is the only time amnesty has existed for machine guns. And what does that mean? It means if it was a war bringback. So the National Firearms Act of 1934 regulated machine guns. That's where you got your $200 tax stamp. It's on a registry. You had to go through your passport photo. You'll have to go through your fingerprinting and so on and so forth. Wait for that approval slip from the federal government to come to you in order to own it. Well, obviously, World War II had happened since then. And a lot of guns were just brought back from World War II by veterans. This was perfectly legal. This was fine. Same thing happened during Vietnam. These guns existed outside the National Firearms Act because they were built by other countries that don't have the National Firearms Act. So they decided that, hey, you know what? We want all these unregistered machine guns on the NFA. We're going to give blanket amnesty to everyone to go in, re-register them, and so they're on the NFA now. So there will be NFA transferable machine guns, and you just have to, they waive the tax stamp, you just have to go let us know you have them, serial number, what it is, and so on and so forth. Now, they haven't banned machine guns to the registry yet. You can still make brand new ones. This 1968, that wouldn't happen until 1986. And we'll get into that in a later video with the Firearm Owners Protection Act. So you can still make new ones. These are just the ones that came back from war, is what we're really talking about. Or machine guns that were in circulation in 1930, pre-1934, when the National Firearms Act came into existence. They weren't on the registry. So they're bringing them now into the NFA. Now, we also got to remember, the ATF does not exist yet. They didn't come around until 1972. That would become underneath the Nixon administration. So who is running the NFA? Well, it is the Department of Justice, the FBI, the DOJ. That's who's running the National Firearms Act and all firearms regulations in the United States. And I should also say, when it comes to importation, just backing up a little bit here, it also has been applied, that importation clause of sporting purpose, to ammo as well. That's why certain calibers are not allowed in the United States from outside. You won't see imports of, say, 50 cal, for instance, because they don't have a quote-unquote sporting purpose. Even though it's okay to make it and sell it here in the United States, you don't see outside the United States 50 cal. Another thing it did do is it did cap the caliber at 50 cal, the Gun Control Act. So you can no longer get anything over 50 cal. 50 cal, anything over 50 cal is now a National Firearms Act item. You have to go through the whole tax stamp registration process, so on and so forth. Black powder is exempt. The biggest thing we're going to see today is the frame and receiver rule that's currently being challenged in courts that the ATF has dropped. This is the Gun Control Act. It updated what is a firearm. It established that the firearm is the part and mechanism that contains both the fire control group and the barrel. This is important because in modern world, most firearms are actually exempt from this. However, that is not how it's been interpreted. It hasn't been re-updated by Congress. For instance, if you got a pistol, the pistol comes in two pieces, generally. You have the frame. That contains the magazine, which is in the pistol grip. You have the fire control group, the trigger. But the barrel and all that, and even in for instance, say a striker fired, all the actual firing mechanism, fire pin and all that stuff is in the upper half. Well, the lower half is a serialized item. The upper half is not. The Gun Control Act actually has that as incorrect, technically, and the ATF has dropped lawsuits and charges against people because they would rather keep their enforcement action than lose it, because it doesn't actually technically follow the Gun Control Act provisions. It updated what a machine gun is, which is, more than one bullet expended per trigger pull. We're seeing this with like FRT, bump stocks, and all that. So it really, really defined what the firearm is, how you can look at it. Now, the one thing it didn't do was eliminate any other weapons or really clarify destructive devices. That will come a little bit later, because at this point, destructive devices were generally considered not to be shotguns. But in the 90s, underneath the Clinton administration, they decided to redefine certain shotguns as destructive devices, and it's all based on bore size. The Gun Control Act didn't close that loophole, which allowed them to come in later. So what is negative about the Gun Control Act? Well, it's really, honestly, it's too open. While they did do some hard definitions, those definitions really don't apply in today's world in a lot of ways. But also when it comes to the importation, that's the biggest thing. It made it so that it's so open, sporting purpose. You could willy-nilly say something's not sporting purpose and just let it go, and that there's really no recourse, because importation has broad authority in the executive branch under Article 1 of the Constitution. Now, the other thing that it did do, I know we're going a little bit longer on this, but that's okay. It's not going to be too long. The other thing it did do, which was eliminate mail-order guns. Now it had to go to the FFL system. So this is what Lee Harvey Oswald, we won't get into whether or not I actually think he shot the president, but he ordered his Caracano rifle through the mail, got delivered to his house. This is the old Sears Roebuck guns that used to get delivered. These are the things that they used to do, and now you can't do that anymore. You have the current system, which is sent to a licensed dealer like us at 2F by C Tactical, and then you would have to do the background check, which came in the Brady bill later, but then you would have to have it sent to us, and we'd have to fill out a form, and then you got it. The other thing it did do, too, that affects us today, and probably greatly so, because this wasn't updated in the Brady bill, was it banned handguns from being sold across state lines. So that means if you're in Wisconsin, for instance, we're here in Minnesota, I can't sell a handgun to someone who's a Wisconsin resident. I can have him purchase it, then I have to ship it to Wisconsin and have them pick it up there, and the Wisconsin dealer runs the background check. This is pre-internet. So the way it would work is if in certain states you had to call local sheriffs and make sure that they are cleared to pick up that gun. Well, a sheriff in, say, Minnesota may not know about someone from California or Texas. This is 1968. You don't have the internet. You can't just do a quick search and see if they're prohibited or not. There's no centralized database. So it banned selling across state lines. The other thing it does do that kind of affects us today, it created the multiple pistol sale form. This is something that us dealers do on the back end. I let you know when you come to my shop. Sometimes people don't, which is if you buy 2 handguns, or more than 1 handgun, I should say, 2 or more handguns within a 5-day period, we have to fill out a form with your name, the purchaser, the handguns, the serial numbers, importers, calibers, type, and then we put it all on the form. All if you bought 5 handguns, all 5 handguns, and then we have to email it, fax it, or mail it off to the ATF, where you go on a 30-day watch list with them, quote unquote. We also have to turn into local law enforcement. This is where you're getting those ATF agents that were knocking on doors asking to see certain guns. These were multiple pistol sale forms. This is where it comes from. Very dangerous. But this is, in essence, the Gun Control Act. It does a lot of things, but it's really just an update of the National Firearms Act. It's not a full act by itself. It is tied to the National Firearms Act. Next, we're going to look at the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986. Now, that does a lot. We may have to break that up into a couple different videos, just because that does do a lot. This came underneath Ronald Reagan. But till then, can't wait to see you. I'm sorry it took me a couple weeks to get this video. It's very busy, and we do our best to get this out once a week. We're probably going to have to do this every other week, but I look forward to seeing you. Again, like, comment, subscribe, and can't wait to see you.